Hey everybody, it's Mike, and welcome to Chip Damage. And you know what? I'm worried about Xbox. Yeah, believe it or not, I've loved the Xbox brand ever since it launched back in November 2001, 22 years ago. And don't get me wrong, I don't love them more than the other major console manufacturers. I love, as you could tell from my prior videos, Sony games, Nintendo games, PC games, but I really do count Xbox, Microsoft right up there with it. And I feel like that's a fading thing, especially in the newer generations of consoles, because quite honestly, as this brand, the Xbox brand and series of consoles have gone on, they've kind of lost a lot of their personality. And not for a lack of trying, because Microsoft is making some crazy big moves in recent history in order to kind of rebolster this brand and make it really a threat to its competitors in Nintendo and Sony. And with that, let me say, I think that it is imperative and very important for there to be the big three. Yes, it has been Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft's Xbox in the console space, like I said, for 22 years now. And I think you need at least those three to have a balance. PC is kind of nebulous, its own separate thing. I think no matter what you do, PC games will always come out, and more what would normally be console exclusives are coming to the PC. So we're going to leave that out of the conversation for this video. But the reason why I think, and I mentioned this in prior videos, that I think Xbox needs to do better is because if they don't, the other console maker, particularly Sony, as they're more of a direct competitor to Xbox in terms of the games that they offer, like Nintendo kind of mostly focuses on their exclusives. Sony gets arrogant and can do whatever they want, charge what they want, make their types of games. They aren't worried about Xbox nipping at their heels like they were in the PS3 era in particular. And, that's just not a good thing. You don't want a monopoly in gaming. And these three companies kind of emerged from the early generations console wars, like up to the 6th gen. There were so many failed consoles that came out. And some of them from massive companies like the Panasonic 3DO, Atari's Jaguar, the Philips CDI. There were tons and tons of consoles and companies vying for kind of top spot along with Nintendo and Sega at the time. And, of course, Sega got out of the hardware business. And what emerged in the year 2000 was Sony, and then with the PlayStation 2 being dominant, and then a year later with the GameCube and Xbox coming out in 2001. And that was kind of the first generation, the 6th gen, one of my favorite, if not my favorite gen, where that kind of triangle of console manufacturers came from. And, for what it was, for what it is, Xbox has never been a particularly strong brand out of my homeland. Out of the United States, outside of the United States, Xbox has never been particularly popular, especially in Japan. But it is a fairly popular brand here. And as we'll see in the rest of the video, they have been trying to break into other markets with a number of titles, but it just never really held. Regardless, right now, Microsoft is in a very precarious spot. The last decade, yes, decade of Microsoft consoles and games have not exactly been stellar. And there have been some very big moves made in the last couple years in order for Xbox and Microsoft to bolster this brand. And I'm just honestly confused at this point at what's going on. And I'd really hate to see at the end of all of this, Microsoft exit the console business and solely focus on PC. Now, that would be kind of sad because, Nintendo and Sony would be the only games in town, and they could just do what they want. They wouldn't worry about their services, their pricing, their competitive viability, their graphical power. I mean, it's always these companies worry about what their competitors doing when they make their consoles and set their prices. And if there's one less big dog in the yard, that means the other two get arrogant. And when consoles get arrogant, you get the Xbox One and the PS3. And those are okay consoles, but they are bred from the arrogance of their prior generation's console. So with that, what am I talking about? What do I want to talk about in the rest of this video? I want to talk about where Xbox came from, how it started, its middle era, where it's been recently, and what they're doing now, because it's actually crazy. And I just want to have a general discussion. And as always, I love comments in these videos. That's the reason I do these videos, to react and respond to your comments as quickly as I can. And that's the reason I want to do this. So without further ado, let's jump in. If you like what you're about to hear, if you're interested, please like, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff, and please leave a comment so I'll be able to reply to you and we can have some good conversations and maybe spark some ideas. But let's talk about where Xbox started. Like shown earlier on the table, I don't want to lug it up because it weighs 50 pounds. The original Xbox dropped in November 2001 to compete with the GameCube. And you know what? For an American console, despite the size of the manufacturer Microsoft, they launched pretty strong. Now, most people will tell you that the original Xbox was like purely good because of Halo. It was kind of a one-trick pony. I've said this in many videos. That's not true. Halo deserves all the credit that it gets. It's an amazing game. It's one of the greatest games of all time. But even right out of the gate, Xbox had some great titles. And because they were an American company, they wanted to try to capture the Japanese market. They went hard in that direction too, with fantastic exclusives like Dead or Alive 3, which at the time was probably the best looking console game period in 2001. This game still visually holds up. But, you know, and they would do this a couple times. Fairly certain that a few years later, Team Ninja's Tecmo's Ninja Gaiden game was the best looking console game at the time in 2004. These are still fantastic looking games. This is probably one of the best action games ever made to this day. This game keeps getting remade, but the original version is still an Xbox exclusive. Yet again, trying to capture that Japanese market and have some of their own exclusives. There's the legendary Otogi games, which I've talked about in so many videos. Like, these were wonderful games that were only on the Xbox. They could probably only be done on the Xbox because the Xbox had additional power over the PS2 and the GameCube. It's often forgotten, but if you look at the technical specs of the Xbox, it was quite a head and shoulders above the PS2 and GameCube. As much as I love those systems, and as much as especially the GameCube could push it with games like Rogue Squadron, Metroid Prime, and Resident Evil, the Xbox had some titles that could really outshine it in terms of graphical power at the very least. And, you know, even back then, Xbox had was acquiring companies as they are now, like Rare. Now, most people look down on the time when Xbox bought Rare because they didn't put them to the full use that Nintendo perhaps did when they made their legendary titles, but there were some good things that came out of it, like Conker's Live and Reloaded, fantastic game, remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day from the N64 with online play, which if you remember, back in that era, if you weren't around on consoles, online play was like almost non-existent. I mean, it's been around since like the Genesis and the Satellaview. However, like solid online play really only came into existence during that 6th gen. PS2 had some online functionality. It wasn't great and not many titles supported it. The GameCube had very few titles, but the Xbox Live service was solid. And there was a number of fantastic titles other than Halo 2, which yet again deserves all the credit that it gets. But there were great titles like Crimson Skies, MechAssault, and the aforementioned Conker's Live and Reloaded that kind of paved the way for what online gaming is in the console space now. Xbox did that. This is a console that only sold about 24 to 25 million units, which today would be seen as a terrible failure. In comparison to its competitor, the PS2, which hovers around sales figures 155 to 160 million, it did not like really pose a threat, but that online play was something else at the time. Yet again, fantastic exclusive smaller games from Japanese companies like Namco's Breakdown, which recently just got backwards compatibility. Like, it was just an out-of-nowhere game that probably really couldn't have been done graphically on the other consoles. It's a really interesting curio. And while some big companies like Square Enix and Capcom really didn't support the Xbox, with the original Xbox with only a few titles like Dino Crisis 3, which is terrible, on the original Xbox, Sega went all in. Sega had just recently dropped out of the console market, and while they gave some of the Sonic Adventure games and Skies of Arcadia to the GameCube and did games like Sonic Heroes on the PS2, they had some great exclusives very early on for the original Xbox, like the legendary Panzer Dragoon Orta, the 4th Panzer Dragoon game, the sequel to Jet Grind Radio or Jet Set Radio Future, which is fantastic and still an Xbox exclusive. Out of nowhere, just experimental exclusive titles like Gun Valkyrie and the sequel to their fantastic Crazy Taxi 2 with Crazy Taxi 3 High Roller. Still, these are Xbox exclusives, Japanese games, kind of out there games. I wouldn't say what you would call they were AAA games, but they weren't indie like cheap bargain bin games either. Like, these were just like a good selection of games to bolster the library, to grab as many people as possible, because they didn't have that built-in kind of audience that Nintendo and Sony had. They didn't have the mascots like Mario and Zelda on the Nintendo side, or Solid Snake and Crash and Spyro on the Sony side. They had to kind of build a strong library very quickly. The original Xbox was only really in production from 2001 to 2005, and they had some great titles. Other exclusives that would later go to PC but could only really be done in the console space on the Xbox, that originally debuted as exclusives, like Star Wars Republic Commando and Knights of the Old Republic, one of the most legendary Western RPGs of all time. It was a place where the Elder Scrolls series kind of really blossomed. Elder Scrolls 1 and 2 were very decently popular PC games, but it being an Xbox game really brought it to a whole new audience. It was fantastic on the Xbox. Yes, the loading times were very long, especially in this Game of the Year version, but it worked, and it really couldn't have worked anywhere else. And it was just a great way to say, like, yeah, we don't have a lot of JRPGs like the other two consoles do, especially the PS2, but we have some great Western main RPGs that aren't there, like Knights of the Republic and Elder Scrolls Morrowind. Now, and also, speaking of PS2 games, if you got your game, back in the 6th gen, there were many ports, games that were cross-gen on all three, which is almost kind of rare now, that were comparable. PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. There were many third-party titles that were launched on all three. And while many of them were somewhat similar, generally, especially in the collector sphere, you would know that the Xbox version was usually a little better graphically, or in the case of some other titles, had more content, because yet again, Xbox was pushing really hard at the time. Games like Onimusha got an enhanced re-release, Genma Onimusha, which is still an Xbox exclusive. Even today, the PS4 Xbox One release is still the original Onimusha version, without the additional enemies and powers that this version has. And even out of nowhere, Tecmo, with their strong association, the Fatal Frame games 1 and 2 got in director's cuts with extra content on the original Xbox. They were going hard on all cylinders, and it was from the East and the West, from companies big and small, from big titles like Ninja Gaiden to smaller titles like Otogi, to the middle of the ground like Crazy Taxi. There were so many good Xbox games, and I think that's what helped keep this console alive. Remember, to launch in 2000, with Sony's after the launch of Sony's massively successful PlayStation 1 in '94, and 2 decades of Nintendo being just fantastic from the '80s, it was intimidating even for a big company to try to break into the market and compete with them. Look at some more recent examples like Amazon Luna or Google Stadia. Yes, those are more service-based, but those are giant companies that put a lot of marketing into a console-like thing, and they're not successful. Like they in Google's case, like they can't get anything off the ground. Imagine any company, even something like Apple, trying to launch a console today. I don't think it would work. And I don't think they would have such a diverse library of titles right outside the gate. Yet again, nowhere near the PS2 in terms of sales at the end of the day, the Xbox. It's a 25 million to like 157 million. But it did outsell Nintendo's GameCube, which was kind of amazing. And I think it took this number, these dozens and dozens of fantastic exclusives, the enhanced graphics, and the online pay to get there. Microsoft was really trying to appease all gamers, and I think that's something that they have lost in recent years. But because of their massive success, and maybe perhaps due to Sony's arrogance in the next generation, the Xbox 360, the direct successor to the original Xbox, came out of the gate swinging. It came out, and this is well-known history, a full year earlier than the PS3. It was $200 cheaper at the high end in the US. And though it lacked a Blu-ray drive and on paper was a less powerful graphical system, the Xbox 360 for the first couple of years clobbered the PS3. The PS3 was somewhat of a joke, and it would later go on where sales were like a little bit even at the end of the day, and even a little bit stronger in the PS3's favor. I think it was like 85 to 87 million. But for an entire decade, the 360 was kind of the de facto game console that people had. You'd have a Wii or DS on the side, but 360 is where you would get your big third-party games and whatnot. The 360 launched with the Xbox Live service, unlike its predecessor, and it had that infrastructure built in. And the early years of the 360 were truly special. Many fans were waiting on Halo 3, of course, which wouldn't launch until 2007. But there were a number of fantastic exclusives right out of the gate, or within the first 2 years, I should say. Dead Rising, which would later go on to be a franchise. Great game from Capcom. You saw that support right out of the gate from Capcom. Dead or Alive continued their support with the exclusive Dead or Alive 4, which had the Spartan, I believe her name was Nicole, as a playable character. Great fighting game. You had Japanese companies like From Software doing smaller, just weird fun games like Chrome Hounds just on the 360. And that's to mention that a lot of Japanese companies of the bigger variety started to notice the 360 success and realize that maybe Sony had been arrogant, and that their console was hard to develop for. And HD development was very expensive, so they couldn't afford to be on only one console. So some huge franchises that were previously not on Xbox started to come on these. These were mostly Sony branded titles like Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 4 famously is like the only console it's not on is the original Xbox, but it came out day and date with the PS3 version on the 360. You had a huge announcement of Final Fantasy 13, a numbered Final Fantasy coming to the 360. For years, numbered Final Fantasies had only been coming out on Sony consoles. They were basically a Sony-only joint. Final Fantasy 7 is basically the flagship title for the PlayStation 1. It's the second highest selling game behind Gran Turismo. Final Fantasy 10 is the face, or was the face of the PS2 for years. So even though it's a 3-disc version, Final Fantasy 13 and Square Enix support on the 360 was a big get. And Capcom finally, along with Dead Rising, started to get more and more support for the 360 with giant titles like Devil May Cry 4, which is yet again a series that was originally exclusive to PlayStation 2, coming out on the 360 day and date. There were other titles too, like Tekken 6. Kazuya and Jin are yet again almost Sony mascots, but Tekken 6 launched day and date on the 360 with the PS3. Incredible gets. And in fact, there were exclusive Square Enix games for the 360 that weren't on its PlayStation 3 rival. Final Fantasy XI, yes, while on the PlayStation 2, never debuted on the PlayStation 3. It was a 360 game because the 360 had such a strong infrastructure online that Final Fantasy XI worked. The PlayStation 3 was a more graphically powerful console, but its online service struggled for many, many years before it became a paid service. And that's not to say, yet again, the 360 led the generation. And I'd say before 2010 or maybe even 2011, they had fantastic exclusives of their own. They had Ninja Gaiden 2, still the only way to play the original and best. I will say this as many times as I want. The best version of Ninja Gaiden 2 is on the 360. You had exclusives. Maybe the 360 didn't get Demon Souls, but From Software did give us the exclusive and pretty fun little game, Ninja Blade. But continue with Japanese support with huge titles like Lost Odyssey, which many people consider the real Final Fantasy 13 because the developers of this developed the first 10 Final Fantasy games, Hironobu Sakaguchi. And this game is fantastic and never came to other consoles. More support from Japan, just trying to capture that market, which they never did. Enchanted Arms, a turn-based strategy RPG from Software, launching within the first year of the 360's life. You had some fantastic shoot 'em ups, which is a huge market in both Japan and Southeast Asia, like Dodonpachi Resurrection, Akai Katana. These were exclusive games, not on the Wii or the 360. They were going hard, guys. They were going so hard on the 360. Microsoft supporting other devs. Of course, you had the Xbox Live Arcade, which for many years was ahead of the game than the PSN service, because that kind of trickled out. You had games like Symphony of the Night, Castle Crashers, all coming to download. So many great titles. And yes, of course, you had one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time come to the console. Halo 3, which was the highest-selling console exclusive until Super Smash Brothers, I believe. Highest-selling home console, one console game. Something weird like that. But this was a record-breaking game. Like, this was as good as people say. And I'll get into why I'm mentioning this, but like this game in a lot of ways has never been surpassed. It was kind of the pinnacle. Not to say there weren't other great Halo games on the 360, because there were a lot. There's of course the pseudo spin-off game Halo 3 ODST, which yeah, it's short, but it's a great game. You had the graphical remake Halo 1 Anniversary of Halo, the original Halo game. You had Halo Wars, which despite a lot of people kind of being down on this game, and you play it, yeah, it's simple. It's a pretty fun RTS, a console RTS that was actually good. Other than StarCraft 64, I don't think this had been done at the time. And of course, the last Bungie made Halo game, Halo Reach, which is wonderful, a fantastic game. And I'd say, unfortunately, around the 2010, 2011 era, where the CEO, and this is well known, Don Metric, kind of came into the head of Xbox's game division and swung the development and focus more toward casual gaming, towards the Kinect and motion controls, where the decline started. Yeah, it kind of was before the 360 even ended. Gaming had shifted to a more casual audience with the success of Call of Duty, which really just, there were so many Call of Duty clones and things trying to ape the success of that. And so much focus on Kinect, which while it was a huge financial success, like that thing sold like crazy, there weren't actually many good games for it. It was more of just an accessory that was cool to install in your 360 and swipe left and right with your hands. Like you control the menu with your hands, and that's fine, but there wasn't a lot of software. And I think in the eyes of many, that's the time frame when the 360 started, the Microsoft brand, as it were, started to lose credibility. And of course, we have to come around to 2012's announcement, I believe, and it launched in 2013, the Xbox One. The Xbox One sold, well, and here's the thing. This is where Microsoft started to stop, they stopped reporting their console sales numbers. And that's because they were probably, in comparison to the PlayStation 4, its direct competitors' sales numbers, embarrassing. The last generation was basically dominated by the PlayStation 4. The Wii U, let's say, was a tremendous failure for Nintendo, but I feel like in the general sphere, in the ether of gaming, it is talked about more than the Xbox One, because the Xbox One didn't have a personality for many, many years and still really doesn't. There's not many historic games, and I'll mention some exclusive titles, but the Xbox One probably had the worst launch, and probably worse than the PlayStation 3's launch announcements. It was going to be $100 more than the PlayStation 4. PlayStation 4 was going to be $400. The Xbox One was going to be $500. It was a less technically powerful machine. It wouldn't allow used games. That was the initial announcement. It would need to be online only. It was really, really terrible. And that's where I shifted, where I knew right away. During the 360 era, I had, both consoles, PS3 and 360, but my main focus was the 360. I knew right away, as much as I loved many of these exclusive titles, I was going to be a PS4 guy. I got the PS4. I didn't get the Xbox One for years because there really wasn't a need for it. They recanted and kind of stepped back a lot of the things that they announced during that time frame. The Kinect was eventually removed from further models of the Xbox, lowering the price, making it more comparable to PlayStation. And the online always feature was kind of redacted. You could play the console offline after an update, and also after an update, you could play used games, but the damage had been done. And unfortunately, it never fully recovered. The estimate of Xbox One sales is somewhere in the neighborhood between 50 and 60 million, which is still not bad. That's still enough to continue making consoles. But in comparison to the last reported number of PlayStation 4 sales, which is around 117, 118 million, it got clobbered. Considering that the Xbox and the PlayStation 3 kind of leveled out as even, which is a miracle considering the PS2's lead over the original Xbox, Xbox kind of almost reset themselves. To lose that much of a lead was shocking. And that's not to say there weren't some good Xbox One titles. When I did originally get some of them, when I originally did get the console, I did get some of the games that really interested me. And these were for the most part exclusive. Later on, many, if not all of these games would become available on PC. That's one thing I must say. Halfway through the Xbox One's life, I think in order for these games to be able to recoup their cause, they needed to all be on PC as well. It makes sense since Microsoft owns both Xbox and makes PCs. However, it does kind of make Xbox lose some of its draw if you have a PC at home already. Now, some games I did want to get right off the bat, though. Rare Replay, over 30 of Rare, one of the greatest video game developers back then's library of games, the games like Perfect Dark and the Banjo-Kazooie games. This was something you just really wanted to have. Viva Pinata, the Battletoads series. This had a number of fantastic games. Conker's Bad Fur Day. This was worth picking up on the Xbox One. And then you had Killer Instinct. Now, this is famously one of Maximilian Dude's favorite fighting games of all time, and it's really great. It was a revival of an old franchise, and at the end of the day, particularly the version I'm holding here, this ended up being a fantastic game, but it launched in 2013. It kind of fell on a thud because they did a model where it launched with very few characters that were going to rotate. Something that would be more common today, but it just didn't hit with gamers back then. If this had launched as it was now with 30 some odd characters, right out of the gate with all the features it has right now, I think it would have done a lot better. I think it would have even helped the Xbox brand a bit. It's not the way it was, but if you pick this up now, the complete version of Killer Instinct, it's still an Xbox and PC exclusive. Definitely worth it. Xbox One's Killer Instinct, got to check it out. This is an odd one. There was, of course, the early Sunset Overdrive, kind of a open world, chaotic skateboarding dystopian future game made by Insomniac, of all people, the people who make Ratchet and Clank and Sony Spider-Man, who were later acquired by Sony. They made an Xbox game early on that was actually really good. Not enough to really capture a lot of gamers' attention, but something really solid. But these were few and far between because they had a lot of flubs on the original, on the Xbox One, as it were, like the Master Chief Collection. What this should have been right out of the gate is one of the greatest collections in gaming history. To have all of Halo 1, 2, 3, and 4 with their full campaigns, with the options to play Halo 1 and 2 with either enhanced graphics or the original, with all of their multiplayer maps online in one ecosystem, should have been a home run. This should have sold 1 million Xbox Ones day one. However, this game was incredibly buggy and barely worked for years. 4 years. I believe this launched in 2014. And I think it wasn't for 5 years till like 2018 or 19 where this was fully in the kind of the state that they wanted it to be. And I give 343 credit here alone that they stuck with this and updated this. But the damage had been done, and the reputation of this collection really hurt not only 343 and Halo's image, but also Xbox's. As a note, right now, if you were to buy this, this is in fact one of the greatest collections of games, because in its full featured form, it has Halo 1, 2, 3, 4, Reach, and ODST with all of their maps, with the new maps made specifically for this collection, including new maps for Halo 3, extra bonuses, customization features, skulls. This is an incredible collection today. I do suggest if you haven't gotten this yet on either Xbox or PC and you're somewhat of a Halo fan, you have to have this. This is what the dream, but no, that you had back then, but no one talks about it now because of the damage that was done. And if you've never played the Halo franchise, please do yourself a favor. This is the way to do it. The Halo Master Chief Collection now is amazing. Even on the Series X, where it runs at 120 frames per second, the amount of features, the amount of gameplay, the amount of things that you could see in these Bungie Halo games, except for Halo 4, is incredible. This is one of the greatest series of games ever made, and I think this is the best way to play it. But unfortunately, it didn't hit when it needed to hit. And that brings me to another real reason that I'm worried about Microsoft. A big part of it started right here, Halo 5. What more do I need to say? This is a mediocre game in one of the greatest franchises of all time. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not memorable. There's nothing particularly special about it. This came out in 2015, and this would be like if the Mario game on Switch or the new Nintendo console or Zelda game just sucked. It mars it. It feels like there's no leadership. Xbox strongly relied on Halo's kind of as the spear point of their brand, and Halo 5 was kind of a dipping point. That was kind of the whole thing. Gears and Forza and Halo are the triangle of the series that Xbox kind of built themselves on, survived on during the Xbox One era. And while Forza has always been successful and very well made, it is not a broad appeal game. In Gears at the same has never really achieved the level of popularity since Gears 3 came out back on the 360. Gears 4 and 5 and Judgment just aren't as popular. And the Xbox One is just kind of a forgettable console in the footnote of history in a lot of ways. I love it, guys. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a Sony or Nintendo fanboy. As you can see, I love Xbox. But the Xbox One was clearly less successful in capturing the mind share or really trying as hard to capture developers as prior generations of Xbox. Yes, it outsold its original Xbox counterpart, the OG Xbox, but it underperformed compared to its direct predecessor. You're supposed to have a steady stream up. You're not supposed to go from the bottom up down, and that's kind of what happened with this. And there's always been things like the cursed third console, right? They're saying like the third console and any manufacturer is kind of like a dip. You have like the NES, the Super Nintendo, they go up, and then the sales from the N64 came down. PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and maybe Xbox 360 and the One. But I don't think that's a good excuse for kind of what the Xbox One kind of did. Now, near the end of the Xbox One's life cycle, I think they started to kind of realize this, and they started offering the legendary Xbox Game Pass, which is essentially the Netflix for gaming. It's a very common saying. where if you subscribe to Xbox Live at certain tiers, you get a huge selection of rotating games that you can just play. Pretty much every Microsoft owned and made game, as well as many third-party titles, surprising titles even, like the Yakuza series or Kingdom Hearts. And it's an incredible value, and that's what people say. Now, why is Xbox doing this? Well, I hate to say it, they're loser tactics. They have to do that. It's been recently said in a statement that, yeah, they don't make a ton of money. When I think it's like $20 to $50, depending on like your membership, to have Xbox Game Pass. To have access to that many games, it's simply not possible to make too much of a profit off of that. It's a good way to get people in your ecosystem, but they would have never done that if they were selling games at $60 consistently at a pace with their competitors, the PlayStation 4 and later on in the generation, the Switch. And I'm very happy that Xbox Game Pass exists because it keeps the company afloat. And even though it's not really for me, because I like owning my games, I like collecting them, whether physically or if I purchase them digitally to keep them, despite any, like with the Xbox Game Pass, you don't keep those games if you end this subscription. However, in order to compete, it kept them afloat, and it allows gamers to try series that perhaps they wouldn't have otherwise, like Yakuza or Kingdom Hearts, or even some Final Fantasy titles being on Xbox. So that brings us to today with the Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. The Xbox Series S being the weaker digital-only console, and the Xbox Series X kind of being the more hardcore main console. And, you know, on paper at launch, you would think that they were going to come out of the gate pretty strong, and they did. The Xbox Series X actually has more horsepower under the hood than the PlayStation 5. And leading up to this, for the prior years, Xbox had purchased a number of third-party titles, third-party companies. Mostly Western companies, if not all Western companies. I think at this point, Xbox has kind of given up on capturing the Japanese market, which is a real shame because you got some great titles in prior consoles trying to do that. However, we're now 2.5 years into this console's lifespan, and there's barely anything to really talk about. Now, Xbox has done some fantastic things with the Xbox series of consoles, such as backwards compatibility with all Xbox One games and a lot of 360 games and a number of original Xbox games. Not a huge catalog, but some heavy hitters there. And most of them are enhanced and run far, far, far better than they did on their own hardware. Examples, Otogi 1 and 2 and Breakdown are backwards compatible and run great on that console. Games like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Generations, like if you pop those physical discs into your Xbox Series X, they look and run fantastically in 4K, 60 frames. And the other companies simply don't do this really. PlayStation 4 can be played on PlayStation 5, but there's very few games that actually have free enhancements. Switch isn't really backwards compatible with physical media, obviously, because it switched from discs to cartridges. So the Xbox at least has that going for them. Of course, the power under the hood. But like I said, 2.5 years later, what are we playing? Like Forza and Microsoft Flight Simulator? What is the reason to really own this console if you're like kind of a hardcore gamer over purchasing a Switch or a PlayStation 5 in particular? Now, let's talk about what the plan is. Like, of course, the pandemic slowed down a number of games development, but Xbox has been doing this for a while. They've purchased a number of companies and promised a lot, and we're just not seeing it. And that kind of brings me to the crux of why I decided to make this video today. It is very well common known knowledge that Microsoft, in their spree of buying companies, made one of the largest purchases in entertainment history, or their attempted purchase of Activision Blizzard. And that is currently under review by a number of larger regulatory companies in order to see if that would create something close enough to a monopoly so that it can be denied. And particularly Sony is very adamant that the Xbox is trying to create a monopoly. There's a lot of court cases, but it looks like, I believe, that Xbox is going to end up owning Activision Blizzard, and that's huge. And I make a point to say Activision Blizzard, by the way, that because a lot of people don't know, like, yeah, Activision Blizzard is one company. The people who make Call of Duty make World of Warcraft and Overwatch and Diablo. Like, so the number of IPs that are going to go under their hat are going to be massive if this deal goes through. Yeah, it will be Microsoft's World of Warcraft. And while many people have said that, and it is true that for a number of years, a lot of games in long-running series will continue to show up in other consoles, it's more than likely that in a couple of years, if this goes through, Call of Duty, one of the largest, I'm going to say probably the second largest at this point, casual console game. The second largest like game in consoles behind maybe Fortnite might be a Microsoft exclusive, and that would make a massive swing. That would without a doubt swing a lot of the casual audience to purchase an Xbox. That may happen in the next couple of years. I believe there are deals up until like 2027 or 2028. But if Xbox gets that, they're essentially secured. But yet again, that's not a definite thing. It's a crazy thing. But at the same time, it was a massive purchase, and I feel like it came at a huge cost other than just money. 10,000 employees throughout Microsoft have recently been announced to have been, they will lose their job if they have not over the course of the next year. And a lot of them came from the company that made this game, 343 Studios, the company that made Halo Infinite. Now, it has been well over a year and a half since this game launched. Almost 2 years. This game it's already been over a year since this game launched, Halo Infinite. And this was a game announced way back in 2018, I believe. I believe it was at the E3 that this was announced. And this game had a lot of hype behind it. This was going to be the game that after the middling Halo 4 and the very mediocre Halo 5 that would revive the franchise back to the standards that Bungie had set and kind of be the spearhead for the new generation. And unfortunately, it just wasn't. This game is nearly forgotten now. Its player count is incredibly low. The campaign was okay and it played very solidly, but the amount of content compared to games like Halo 3 was laughable. And this game was delayed over a year. This game was supposed to come out in 2020. It didn't come out until the end of 2021. Like, that's unacceptable. When I first played this, I'm like, yeah, it plays good, but there was something missing right off the bat. And with the amount of time they've had to make updates for this huge franchise, honestly, this game, no matter what update they make now, it's already marred. It's already kaput. No one's coming back to Halo Infinite. And with the recent string of firings, it's really unfortunate because that game had potential, but now never live up to it. And that just lets, speaking of a cost, like if Activision Blizzard is purchased, will they focus on the other companies that they purchased? And these games are where are these games? Right here, I have a short list of companies they've purchased and games that they are apparently working on and how long it's been since they've been announced. Of course, they made a massive purchase back in 2021 of Bethesda, the makers and owners of Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Doom, Quake, and so many other legendary franchises, Wolfenstein. That alone would have kept Microsoft in the game. If a new Elder Scrolls, if Elder Scrolls 6, Skyrim sequel, would have come out exclusively on the Xbox, many people would have bought Xbox. But where is it? The game, yet again, was announced back in 2018, and Skyrim is over 12 years old now, releasing back in November 11th of 2011. And Bethesda's kind of, how can I put this? Its reputation has kind of fallen. Now, of course, there was the game Starfall. Basically, Fallout in Space was announced a number of years ago, was meant to launch at the end of 2022. It missed its release window, and we really don't know when that's coming out. But honestly, there wasn't a lot of hype behind it. There was some marketing, but it's not really the game that I think Xbox needs Bethesda to make. They need them to make Fallout 6 or Elder Scrolls 6, or Fallout 5 or Elder Scrolls 6 as quickly as they can. They need to make a exclusive Doom game, exclusive Quake game. Now, but before I go any further, I do want to interject that, yes, I would like to see these games become exclusive to the Xbox brand. And I'm sorry if you're more of a PlayStation-only person, but in order for PlayStation games to be better, I think Xbox games need to be better. I think that developers that PlayStation has purchased, like Bungie or Insomniac, will work harder if they have games to compete with on the Xbox. At the end of the day, I think that's better. I mean, Sony's so arrogant at this point that some of their games are $70, and maybe that's the way it's going. But Xbox isn't doing that because they are behind. Yes, the Switch is charging $70 for Zelda, but that's a whole nother story. But I want a reason to own a Series X. I want a reason to be proud to have that, and I think a lot of people need that. I think that competition is important. I think the acquisition of Call of Duty, despite what Sony said, would not kill the Sony brand. People will buy PlayStation no matter what. That brand, like Nintendo, even more so, is very established. You'll always have God of War. You will have Spider-Man. You will have Horizon. You will have Gran Turismo. You will have the full backing of most Japanese third-party companies like Square Enix and Capcom and Arc System Works. Microsoft doesn't really have that at the moment, but they could with the companies that they purchased. So yes, I would love to see Bethesda do something other than that other than simply Starfield or Redfield coming, or Redfall as it were, which is under their banner as well, from the makers of Dishonored. It's not enough. That game has some hype, but imagine that. Just like how Elder Scrolls 3 was a console exclusive for Xbox, if Elder Scrolls 6 was, that would be a huge boon to that franchise. But where is it? Where are these games? They purchased this company a number of years ago, and what is it? What is Bethesda doing? Making Fallout 76 content? Stop it. They purchased Compulsion Games in 2018, who made We Happy Few, which was kind of a flop after a number of years, and they are working on nothing. There's no big announcement, to my knowledge, of anything. So what's there? They purchased Double Fine Games, which is kind of cool. Double Fine Games, the makers of Psychonauts and Brutal Legend, Grim Fandango, good company. Psychonauts 2 was not an exclusive because it was a kick-started game, so it ended up, and you had the option to pick PlayStation back then before the purchase of the company by Microsoft. So they haven't made an exclusive for Xbox yet. And right now they're not really working on any. There's nothing announced. There's no like, oh man, Double Fine Games like next project. It will be only on Xbox, but what is it? We don't know. And there's Ninja Theory, a very good little company, mid-sized company, I should say, the makers of Enslaved, and I like this game. This is a good game. I think it's starting to be kind of redeemed by history. DMC, Devil May Cry. They were purchased by Microsoft, and the next game they were working on is the success to their game Hellblade 2, but that was announced back at the end of 2020. And yes, it is definitely coming out, but the amount of time that we've been waiting for this game is kind of insane due to its like somewhat limited appeal. Like the original Hellblade was a success because it was a smaller, cheaper game with fantastic visuals and intriguing story. I think they're trying to turn it into this big this big tentpole franchise, which really I don't think you should do with Hellblade, because it's about a woman summoning, fighting her mental demons that maybe manifest in the real world. It's not really a franchise that you can like make merchandise out of, you know what I'm saying? And if they're not trying to make it some big game, why is it taking so long? And the original Hellblade took a long time because it was a smaller company, but now that they have Microsoft backing, like where is this game? Like what is taking so long? So yet again, and it's not something you run out and buy a console for. And other than that, they announced Project Mara back in 2020, which is yet again another game they're working on that we know nothing about. So where's the excitement there? Moving on, we have Obsidian, fantastic developers of a number of RPGs like Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 and the wonderful Outer Worlds, announcing Outer Worlds 2 as an Xbox console exclusive. That's really cool. That game sold pretty well. That is something that Xbox kind of needs. I think that might sell a console or two. It actually might. Not going to be this huge, massive thing. We haven't seen anything from the announcement of it back in 2021, but it's an RPG. It's going to take a while. So Outer Worlds 2, that's a win. But then you have the other big RPG that's supposed to come to Xbox, Fable, announced like in 2020, like 2-3 years ago. Like, where is that? We've heard nothing. Fable was a pretty big franchise. I'd say Fable 2 was kind of the peak of popularity. Fable 3 was big, but that's kind of where it fell off. Like, where's the stock in Fable? I think if a new Fable came out, it'd be a good boon for Xbox, but it's not like that Elder Scrolls, like what it needs. But it's another kind of straw feather in their hat that I think would be great. But where is it? We've seen no gameplay. We have heard nothing about that game. Yet again, we are 2.5 years into the life of this console. This is something that we need. And then you have Rare, which is fantastic company, like I mentioned earlier, Conquer and the Rare Replay. But what are they working on now? Like Everwild announced like back in 2020, like this open world fantasy game that's slated for the back half of 2024. Where is it? Who's talking about it? Who cares? Like, it might be great. Rare's kind of hit or miss these days, but it's not what they need. So it's like kind of sad about that one. And then there's the huge kind of announcement of the new Perfect Dark by this coalition company called like The Initiative, which was supposed to be the first quadruple A game, as it were. Like this dream team of developers working on a new Perfect Dark, Gears developers and whatnot, and original developers of Perfect Dark. But there's been huge delays for that. Huge swaths of people leaving the development of that game. I feel like it's vaporware. We're never gonna. I almost feel like if it comes out, it won't be what it originally was intended to be, if it comes out at all. And that was like a very high budget project. So like I just said, Bethesda, Compulsion, Double Fine, Ninja Theory, Obsidian, Fable, Rare, The Initiative. Out of all of that, we maybe have like 2 or 3 games that are announced and coming out on this very powerful console 2.5 years into its life. Now, we recently had Tango Gameworks' wonderful Hi-Fi Rush, an Xbox Series X console exclusive that everyone loves and kind of came out of nowhere. I would love for more of that to happen. That reminds me of the Crazy Taxi 3s, the Breakdowns and the Gun Valkyries, or the Akai Katanas, just like smaller, Japanese developed, strangely enough, games that just kind of make you want to like give you something to play. Say like, yeah, I got an Xbox and I have this. This is a reason to own it. There's more. We need Xbox needs a lot more of that, and I just don't know. It's in a weird place, man. I don't know what I want, like what they could do. If I think all their attention and focus is on getting Activision Blizzard, as it rightfully should be. If that happens, if this fully goes through, the Xbox brand will probably go on ad infinitum, probably forever, because if Call of Duty becomes exclusive to Xbox, I'd say a huge swath of people will jump over to from PlayStation to Xbox. So there's those casual people, you guys know them, that only buy Call of Duty, maybe a Madden every year. They will become Xbox fans. And that doesn't lessen the PlayStation 5 specialness. It just makes it so that the PlayStation has a competitor that'll push them to make even better games. We won't just get third-person, over-the-shoulder, story-driven games. Not that I don't love those. I do. Last of Us and God of War and all that. But, Sony might be scared. And when Sony is scared, they're going to give us good games. Same with Nintendo. But, like, right now, Xbox is kind of a joke. Like, everyone either has a Switch, a PS5, or both. But because why do I have a Series X? Because I like the backwards compatibility. There's right now nothing I'm really looking forward to. It's all this potential that is not paying off. And unfortunately, Halo was not it. I think Halo as a franchise is essentially dead in the collective consciousness. I think most people have just given up on the Halo franchise ever being good. So yeah, what do I want? I want Xbox to get Call of Duty, because that's what they're getting this for, guys. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Activision Blizzard has a ton of titles. World of Warcraft is big, and Overwatch is big, and Diablo is big. They're nothing in compared to the returning revenue that Call of Duty generates. And once Xbox has that, maybe they could focus on these second single A games. Now, they do a good job with indies, but all 3 companies kind of do a decent job with indies in a lot of ways. I would like them to have a stern footing, an identity. And yeah, because as you've seen, like, the Xbox was kind of is not talked about as lovingly as the PS2 and GameCube in a lot of circles, though it should be. And the 360 is seen as the bro-y console, but it's not, like, of that generation, like the bros only, like, you know what I'm saying, like sports and Call of Duty players. Like, no, the 360 had amazing titles from Japan and smaller titles as well and exclusives. The Xbox One has almost nothing other than the few titles that I've shown here and a few more. And Game Pass. That's what everyone always says, Game Pass. But, like, I'm a collector. I have most of those games. And if I'm going to play them, I'm going to play them physically or buy them digitally. And I think, while it's a great way to get some people in, it still lacks an identity. It can't just be a Game Pass machine. So, unfortunately, I think Halo is dead. And in a couple of years, maybe Call of Duty will be an Xbox brand. But I would love to see some other developers, start making great games. Imagine if we got a new Elder Scrolls and Fallout that pushed the Series X's graphical capabilities, along with the Fable. What if Hellblade 2 is amazing? What if Rare starts making platformers again? The Initiative actually does drop a really good first-person shooter. Like, we're going to have RPGs covered. We're going to have action games covered. It's going to be great. And yeah, Japan's just kind of given up on it, but I think it'll have enough Western RPGs to kind of satiate a lot of people. And, like the console does have a little more horsepower in some areas. Maybe the third-party games will look a little better on the Series X. Right now, it's kind of like dead even, like, if you look at like Digital Foundry, but even so, it's another feather in their cap. And yeah, guys, at this point, I'm just rambling because I'm worried. I've liked this trifecta. There's been a balance for the last 21 years, and that balance has shifted where PlayStation, I love it. I got a PS5 as soon as I could. They're doing fantastically. Switch has surpassed their sales numbers, the PlayStation 4s, despite its lack of power and online capability. It's still an amazing console. And the Xbox is just kind of like this afterthought. Like, no one even talks about it. And that's just sad. I want all my homies to be good. I want my Nintendo PlayStation and Xbox to do well. You ever been in a group of friends and you're all doing okay, you know, job's going good, your life's doing good, your significant other's happy, and then you got your one friend who's just kind of a killjoy in the corner because they have like a cloud, oh, I just lost my job. Like, that's what Xbox feels like right now. Now, I'm really sad because I like to see them all do well. I want people who have already bought a Series X to continue to like it, and have some exclusives to themselves, to be able to have not an argument, but the conversation with the PlayStation 5 owner, like, hey, you have this and I have this, and this is why they're comparable. This is why I chose, and I think Xbox is better for me than a PlayStation. And you got to have a Switch on the side. It's almost not a competitor. You just kind of have to have a Switch if you want those Nintendo games. So yeah, that brings me to the end, guys. I'm worried about my boy Xbox, and it's in a really precarious time now. I don't know. I think they're going to get Activision Blizzard, but we're going to see. And even if they do, I don't want them to become just the Activision Blizzard console. You know, they have all these companies. Put them to work. So, with all that said, I've been rambling for a while, guys. What do you guys think? Have you been Xbox fans for a long time? And if you have, when did you jump in? What were some of your favorite Xbox exclusives? What were some of your favorite Xbox exclusive features? Have you picked up? Were you one of the ones who got an Xbox One early? What did you do with that console throughout the generation? Have you gotten a Series S or X now? And what are you doing with it right now? Are you enjoying it? Because there are more to consoles than just games. There are features and online capabilities that are important. Tell me, what are your experiences with them? What do you think about Xbox buying up all these consoles? Do you want them to go exclusive? Do you want them to not go exclusive? Do you think that the Activision Blizzard deal will go through? And ideally, like, do you want this trifecta to go on? Maybe you want Xbox dead. Maybe you just want Nintendo and Sony so you can buy both and be happy. But I think that's a dark future. So let me know in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for this, because this has been so much fun. You know, just talking about one of my favorite consoles, some of my favorite consoles of all time, and where I think the future of gaming may go, and just kind of talking about a company that I'm kind of worried about. Microsoft's not going under, but the Xbox brand may, and I want them to stick around for a long time. So until next time, here's to the Xbox brand. Here's to all of them. Here's to Sony. Here's to Nintendo. Here's to PC gaming, what have you. Stadia, you got to stay. Oh, not anymore. Luna, you subscribe to Luna, good for you. But my name is Mike. This has been Chip Damage. This big boy is the Xbox, and thank you for joining.